Really?
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Many of you might not know who I am. A university is usually a formal place, or sometimes a very informal place. And since I came to Santa Barbara, I've been telling people that I acquired a new first name. My first name is Dean, and my last name is Venki. So, welcome to the Glen Culler Honorary Lecture. It is, in fact, terrific to see so many of our alums return to UCSB. Quite a bit has changed on the campus since most of you were here as students, and I hope you understand that the value of your degree is rising daily. I would also like to extend, of course, a most warm personal welcome to Glen and Susie Culler and their family and friends. We have come Glen, we have come together today as friends and colleagues of a man whose pioneering research broke new ground in the computing arena at large, and whose vision and entrepreneurial spirit he so generously instilled in his students as a dedicated professor and mentor in the College of Engineering in the late 1960s. In fact, Glen's work and its applications embody the strength of the college's and its multidisciplinary approach to research and education, for even back then, students and faculty, in fact, all across the campus, North Hall, Engineering 1, I'm told, etc., and from a variety of disciplines, benefited from the online system you developed, as well as other facets of your research. It's quite amazing that over 25 Santa Barbara-based companies, and those of you who will have a chance to walk later can see on the board there or in the book, were formed and through your efforts, and many of which are still viable and growing organizations today. Furthermore, your work significantly impacted the direction and reputation of our own computer science and computer engineering programs. Glen, we celebrate your influence and impact that continues to be felt far and wide. By building on a tradition you are an inspiration to us all. By building on a tradition of excellence and innovation that you so ably accomplished, we can, of course, look ahead and prepare, hopefully, for a great future. Just as you produced so many broadly based and well-trained graduates who went out and met the world's ever-changing technological and scientific needs, we will also strive to continue to prepare our students so they can be the best they can be. It is, in fact, gives me great pleasure right now to introduce to you a great champion of our students, Professor of Mechanical and Environmental Engineering and Chancellor of this campus, Henry Yang.
Well, thanks, Dean Venki. It is especially appropriate to welcome you to UCSB on this occasion to commemorate the work of Professor Glen Culler, while we also note this 25th anniversary year of the Internet and the 50th anniversary of UCSB. The global computing network of networks is currently being celebrated all over the world, and we are only now coming to realize how it is making communication and information exchange possible to the most remote corners of the planet. What many people do not realize is UCSB's role in the origins of the Internet and how directly involved Dr. Culler was in its birth. Our distinguished speaker, Dr. Engelbart, will say more about Glen's importance to the history of computing as we have come to know it today. Many of the audience here this afternoon were colleagues of Dr. Culler and Dr. Engelbart back in the late 1960s when the Cold War was very much in progress. The charge then was to devise a data transmitting network robust enough to function regardless of any adverse conditions that might arise in time of national emergency as well as peacetime. Out of this challenge came ideas and visions for computing never before conceived. Ideas such as direct, real-time, man-machine interaction, graphical display of mathematical data on a screen, and the digital synthesis of sound. Each of these concepts, all of which are today absolutely taken for granted, were first thought of and developed into reality by Glen Culler. Glen was also one of the first to equip a classroom with computer workstations, using his own development, the UCSB online system. It was because of this work that UCSB was selected as a contractor when the ARPANET was first commissioned. UCSB also had the distinction of having its protocols today ready before any of the other three initial modes, namely Stanford Research Institute, UCLA, both are also members of the AAU, and the University of Utah. The result was that the very first data transmission was successfully accomplished here at UCSB, helping to secure our place in history. We are therefore very proud to honor Glen Culler as we recall his accomplishments and reflect on their far-reaching consequences. Thank you all for coming to UCSB for this fine celebration. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Yang. I am now delighted to introduce to you Professor Emeritus of Electrical and Computer Engineering and Computer Science, Roger Wood. Roger is a close personal friend of the Cullers and worked closely with Glen in implementing the online system at UCSB. So Roger, would you come to give us a little tribute?
Well, I've been given the impossible task of trying to highlight in a few minutes all the contributions of Glen Culler. So I'm going to miss a bunch. If I miss your favorite contribution, you have my apologies before I start. But it just can't be done in the allotted time. Let me start by saying that Glen had more bright ideas than any 15 other people combined that I ever worked with. Now, not all of them were equally successful, but some of them were just spectacularly so. And most of the failures reminded me of Leonardo da Vinci's pedal-powered airplane. The technology just, the concept was right. The technology just couldn't cope with what Glen was conceiving. Despite this lack of technology, he did some incredible things. And again, these are highlights. And some of these have been touched on by the Chancellor and by Venki. But the notion of interactive computing with a graphical user interface. I mean, everybody takes it for granted today. But we were talking about an era when it was punch cards, and you got a pile of data from a line printer, and if you wanted to plot, you did it by hand. It was just unheard of, total new concept. On a completely different notion, he was a champion of including lowercase in the ASCII standard when everybody else in the computer industry said it wasn't important. Think what that meant for word processing. I mean, okay. To do the online system, they had to create one of the first multi-programming, multitasking operating systems. And when they ported the thing onto the 360 Mod 50, they had to embed the first time-sharing, probably the only time-sharing system ever embedded into DOS. Over IBM's, horror and consternation, you understand. He was the inventor of function keys. You all know those on your calculator. Well, that started on the online system. He was, I think, the first, or certainly one of the first, to That's my grandkid. to deal with the manipulation of functions as well as just numbers, as well as scalars. And unlike APL, he did it with both real functions and complex functions. The Turing lecture a few years back was on functional languages. And I said, what's a functional language? And I looked at it and said, oh, it's like the online system. So, again, way before his time. He went from there. When he went out, formed his own companies, he became a pioneer in very large instruction word architectures. And in particular, the creator of a line of array processors which has been extremely popular, and frankly, which Motorola's most recent chip is a direct steal from, although they'll never admit it, since Glen has commercial rights and they don't. You've already heard that UCSB was one of the 4 first nodes on the ARPA network, the predecessor of the Internet. What I'd like to add to that is that UCSB was the only site to implement the interim protocol. Now, unfortunately, that's not very useful. That's like having the only telephone in the world. All the guys could do was talk to themselves. But it worked. They could talk to themselves. Okay, the second aspect of Glen I'd like to talk about is that he had an uncanny ability to sit down with a student or prospective employee or individual of any whatever, talk to them for 10, 15, 20 minutes, and analyze whether they had the smarts to tackle a problem that he was interested in. And it didn't matter what their background was, what they knew about. He didn't care about that. Were they smart enough? Okay, if they were smart enough, he'd turn them loose on this problem. And he'd turn them loose with guidance, but with a minimum of micromanagement. And I think that that combination, the extremely bright ideas, the finding bright people, and empowering them and guiding them and helping them to solve really difficult, I mean, earth-shaking problems, has a lot to do with why there's that family tree of companies. And that's just Santa Barbara companies. We on the steering committee didn't have a hope of doing it for all the companies. We just tried to get it right for Santa Barbara. And I think it was, you know, it's that combination, the ideas and the empowerment. It's why we have so many people, why so many people are back here from all over the U.S. for this event. It's really been a wonderful thing. I'd like to conclude by saying that I know of no man with a broader range of contributions in the computer industry. And I also know of no man with a lower ratio of recognition to contributions than Glen Culler. And that's why we're here.
Thank you very much, Roger. I was not, of course, involved. I'm relatively new here, only 3.5 years. But this event, I received so many phone calls that I think I can vouch independently for Roger's statement that so many people called me and said, what a wonderful thing you're doing, because Glen has done so much, but so little recognition of what he did. In fact, I was just reading our own UC brochure, and we listed the formation of the Internet, and of course we know UCLA was very important, but we weren't there, and I felt badly, and I was glad that we were organizing this event. In fact, this event started about 6-8 months ago when we had our research review expanded to be a technology conference where we were trying to encourage entrepreneurship in Santa Barbara and involve a lot of local companies, and I had co-hosts. And people called me at that time and said, Dean Benke, you should actually use that occasion to honor Glen Culler, because he's the one person who actually did so much to build companies in Santa Barbara. And of course I didn't know. I went to Roger and a few others and talked, and it became fairly clear that it was an excellent idea and we needed to honor him, but really have him have his own event. And it took us 8-9 months of a steering committee which had Roland Bryan, Nancy Oster, Dale Taylor, Dave Retz, and of course the college's own Roger Wood and Tim Schwartz to make this happen. My deep appreciation and thanks to all of you. I'd also like to acknowledge my thanks to the members of the staff of the college who worked very hard, Yukina Warner, Kathy Kramer, and Peter Allen. Thanks also to Frank Zuber from Silicon Beach, provided the computer research listserv free of charge. I also want to thank many who have generously contributed to the Glen Culler Endowed Scholarship Fund. So far, we have raised $67,000 towards the $100,000 goal. The endowment fund and the resulting scholarships for outstanding students of computer science and electrical and computer engineering will stand in testimony to Glen's accomplishments, his contributions, and his dedication to education and to his students. It will be the one lasting element of our efforts to honor you. I would also like to give special recognition to Vaughn Mesfin, who we are expecting, and who generously provided the principal gift for the scholarship, John and Virginia Markle, and of course Glenn and Susie Culler, who also provided leadership funding for the endowment. And perhaps by the time of today's activities come to a close, and as time goes on, we will rapidly reach that goal. Our keynote speaker this afternoon is a visionary and a pioneer in the design of modern collaborative computer environments. As principal investigator at the Augmentation Research Center at the Stanford Research Institute, starting in the mid-60s, Dr. Engelbart led his research group in the development of the SRI online system with tools to support asynchronous use by project collaborators. The NLS is still recognized today as one of the most comprehensive systems for supporting wide area collaboration. While Glen Culler was responsible for UCSB's node on the original ARPANET, Dr. Engelbart's innovations and research resulted in the choice of SRI as one of the first 4 nodes of that net. Dr. Engelbart has 20 patents, many of which represent major breakthroughs in computing, including integrated email, Windows technology, and the now ubiquitous mouse. Today, Dr. Engelbart is the director of the Bootstrap Institute, pursuing comprehensive strategies to optimize collaborative computing environments heading into the 21st century. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Doug Engelbart.
Am I on? Oh. Well, it's really a privilege, and when someone suggested that I could come and do this, it was an instant yes, because I don't know anybody that I'd rather travel for and talk to. Is it on yet?
Is that better? Try to get.
Well, I think I'll sit down. Does that work now? See, that's too bad. We had that all worked out.
We did. We tested it. Try one more time.
Does that work? Testing 1, 2. Oh. Saved by a bell. Well, it really is an extreme privilege to be able to sort of help Glen in a situation like this, help acknowledge what he's done. And I listened to that whole parade of things that he's done, and I think, you know, I didn't know a lot of those things about Glen, but he and I were just friends. And I met him in 1963 at an ARPA-sponsored meeting at MIT that was there to kick off the time-sharing system. So there were perhaps 50 people there, and somehow I zeroed in and we became buddies, sort of. And one thing I think of is we're both farm kids at heart, country kids, and we both have a similar picture of, gee, there's some real interesting things there to pursue. Well, why not? You know, it doesn't much matter that the rest of the world isn't yet oriented, or the entrepreneurial spirit of the world hasn't yet caught on to it. Those are their things to do, and they'll be important to society. Right, Glen? Yep. So I picked up one of these things just a little while ago that says what this affair is all about, and I really got a shock. It says Glen Culler Honorary Lecture, and you know, I thought all this time it was the Ornery Lecture. I thought that was very fitting, because that's one image I have of that young guy there. And he's found some way now to hide, so he can be very ornery without saying anything. You know? I think it's great. So anyway, I'll try to do my best to serve the original intent of the ornery lecture. I was trying to wind through my own orientation about what I was after and why we became buddies, and then we both ended up talking about an online system, and they were really quite different. And do you think this is not working?
Try it
Is that better?
now. Go ahead, try it now.
Is that better? I sabotage it. I like attention.
Here, try this one. Right now. Sorry about this.
Isn't that fate?
There you go. Is that better? Try it.
Somebody heard that there's a some high-tech guy was going to be giving a talk. All right. Where was I, Glenn? He can play dumb now. He says, I don't know. But, all right. See, I don't mind trying to insult him. I just have such a high respect when, you know, the image I had of him is, you start talking a little while, and pretty soon there are a lot of things I couldn't understand. I'm not a mathematician, and he would go launching into some mathematical reason. Well, of course, da-da-da-da. And I'd say, well, of course, Glenn, to you, but I'm an instinct guy, and I fly like an instinct engineer, etc. So anyway, I heard somebody told just a while ago how Glenn could sit down with somebody for 15 minutes of talking and decide whether that person was brainy enough to take a problem. I've spent a lot more time like that, and he never gave me any problems, so it told me something. Anyway, so let me do a few things. I'd like to show a few slides that just they had a few slides lying around here the days when he was here, and there are a few from my old lab, etc. And then what I'd like to do is switch to the sort of pictures I like to draw about where the world ought to go in my picture. And it's a world in which I really think Glenn could have made a lot of use for it, and someplace along the way in describing that, I'd like to say why I think he still can. And along the way also, I'd like to say, well, you know, the world is open for a lot of change, and some of it's going to be real trouble for people, and some parts of it will boost the capability collectively for people to cope with complexity and urgency. And that's the part that's the challenge that to me is really, really important. And it takes people like Glenn that can really lead a parade in some of the analytic and capabilities underneath, and it takes people who are wanting to talk about what we're going to have to change in our way of thinking and our way of working, etc., in order to start a really new way in which people can collectively harness their minds and their capabilities into a collective sense of a lot higher IQ among a collective group. So that's been motivating me for the many, many years. That in 1962, after 9 years of being on a crusade and going and getting a PhD, etc., in the computer world, which was a very different world from today's, I got some support to write this paper that's talking about augmenting the human intellect, a conceptual framework. So that framework's evolved, and that's what I'd like to highlight a little later. So if we can have a few of these slides and step through some of them, let's just see if that works too. All right, there's my buddy. And what I'd really like to do is sort of say, you know, I think Glenn gets more credit than he deserves. You know, it's nothing, and I get more credit than I deserve too. And the real reason is somebody forgets to look just beyond a little bit and see the woman behind. So I think Susie Culver sort of probably deserves maybe, maybe Glen deserves some of it, but I'd give her a lot. And sure, so I've got a wife that deserves a lot too. But what I think is that giving Glen a whole day, you have a day like that. So I think if you're going to do things in perspective, it might be a good idea to see if Hillary on her way back from China could sort of be the, kick off something here for we'd have a Susie week. And put it in perspective. Okay, Glen? Nothing personal, it's just... All right. And, that's a backhanded way for giving a lot of credit to my wife. Who, it's really something after you go through so much together like that and you're still with them, still going. Right? Okay, and on for this ornery lecture. You see the ornery guy right there. And he does deserve a lot of credit anyway. And there were slides there of equipment and things, but that doesn't resonate for me. So there were a few, then I looked at this slide and I thought, that's the difference between Glen and me, because I wouldn't know how to analyze those things, see? So that fits, and so I say, all right, my hat's off to Glen, and that's enough of that. Let's we talk about the people. So I think the rest, you can see the way the rest of the lecture is going to go. So one of the things is you're probably going to have to look at these people and wonder, some of them are here. So the real puzzle is to say, what do they look like now? So these are people. So I enjoyed finding this. So there we are. We're at the end of that. So now we're showing a few from my world, and then I'm going to get on about the future. So this was, what happened? See, one of those two boxes is the second imp that got put on the network. And I can't remember what the other one is, but that was some years later, and we finally took a photograph of it. And I don't remember which is which, actually. So much for history, but it's interesting to go back there. They plugged in those things, and I was aware that messages were going back and forth, and I was really waiting to see, we were going to start the Network Information Center, the Online Information Center, and that was a big motivation for me. So come on, you guys, don't you have the network working yet? Well, why not? But that's about as close as I got. And last September, when they had the 25th anniversary, they said that's when packets started to flow. And I thought, a lot of us, others thought, well, we didn't think it was until the next year in 70, because that's when we could start using it. But then in my lab inside, that's one of the scenes of people, because the whole thing was how do you support the way people work all day, etc. So it was the word processing, the hyperlinkage text that got into all of our software. So all of our source code was organized like that, and a lot of things that are sort of much oriented, like today's getting out in the World Wide Web and the like. But it was hard. We were supposed to, we had it fixed so our email by 1970 was interlinked like webbing with our files, with our source code, and the idea was that the Network Information Center could support people coming in through the network and bombing through the collective stuff that's there. But it turned out that one couldn't get the people on the rest of the net to turn and use it. It was sort of a cultural thing that it wasn't invented here. Besides, we built our own text editors. They thought it was just a text editor. So it was an example of something that I'd like to talk about more later when I talk about paradigms. That if you're going to change the world, you have to change the paradigms first if you're going to think it through. So the young man on the right was the import we got. I'm not sure whether he was a reject from Glen Culler or a graduate, but that's Charles Irby, who's here today, and he's had a very illustrious career. He worked with us for 6 or 7 years, then went to Xerox PARC, and was a principal architect for the first system they got that was commercially available for having the new modern interfaces and the like. And then he was with a startup company that did a lot of innovative things using interactive stuff in databases. Then with another startup, and now he's with a startup called Silicon Graphics. And if you want to talk to somebody that sort of has a good feeling for a lineage starting with Glen and getting out there into kind of the world that Silicon Valley is sort of involved, find Glen here during the find Charles Irby here and talk to him. He doesn't look the same. So this is from a paper we gave in 1974 saying, look, the world of the future is going to be like that. You know, you're going to be interconnected and you're going to share. And the kind of work you do in one place, you can transmit. Your interactive links are going to go across, etc. So we try to talk to that in the world, and it really didn't work. It didn't get across. And in 1977, we started losing our research funding because we weren't relevant anymore. We were off in such a strange angle, and the things we talked about weren't different. So we had to go in the commercial world, and many of the higher skilled programmers and stuff went to Xerox PARC, and some of us, 20 of us or so, went to the commercial world with this online system we had and stuck it out through another 13 years. McDonnell Douglas bought that timeshare and TimeNet out, and we were part of that. And we learned a great deal in the industrial commercial world about how people work. All of that, all the things we learned sort of blended in with a picture that I'd like to tell you a little bit later about, you know, where the world could go. One little thing about this ubiquitous mouse gadget stuff is, and also a feeling like what technology was like. In 1963, we started getting some money from ARPA. In 1964, the idea that you're going to use interactive on displays, and you'd like something that you could tell the computer, you could tell the computer what objects.
I think the only one that's really working well.
Oh, really? Yeah. You mean the people back there in the end can't hear me? Now you can? Louder? Can we boost the amplifier a bit? Because my voice has a problem, mechanical. Sorry about that. Anyway, we had fixed up something for interactive displays that we could get a fairly sizable one. So that display system was a custom-made display. And the display itself with its box just had a display tube and the amplifiers that drove the tube. There was no way then to store enough memory so you could use a bitmap displays, so you had to write the beams on for the screen. Okay, they've got the amplifiers in there. Where'd the smarts come from to drive the amplifier? That's the cabinet off to the left was full of the electronics that the computer could tell it what it wanted on the screen, and it could generate the picture that would drive the amplifiers that would drive the tube. So that whole thing cost like $90,000 to custom make in order that you could experiment with a significant size screen and interactive line work. So you say, you know, was the world ready to start talking about interactive computing? You know, hardly. But it was really lucky to get a go-ahead. So that's where we did the experiments on different kinds of devices that we'd like to use for pointing to things on the screen. So we had light pens and tracking balls and a number of things, including the gadget that she has on the screen there that was a strange analog thing. And one of them that I thought of said, oh, hey, there's something that might be missing. So we made this thing here. It's a piece of wood with a couple of wheels in the bottom of it and a button on it, etc. And it's the world's first mouse, that big. See? So it passed all the tests better for speed and accuracy and easy to use on the screen and interacting with, easy to use on the table and interacting with a keyboard. So anyway, that's the World Mouse. So afterward, during the reception, my wife Ballard's going to be holding it. So if anyone wants to come by and pet the mouse, you can see that. The first mouse. And so that's what it looked like. And it used to be covered on wood, so those discs rolled on it. Nowadays, those discs are quite small wheels, and there's a ball in between them and the tabletop, which loses some interesting payoff in mouse movement. We'll talk about that another time. And this was a parallel thing, that if you're going to be pointing at something with one hand, why not use the other to communicate? So we have a chording key set kind of codes that actually are very easy to learn. So everybody in our lab was sitting there with one hand on the mouse, the other hand on the key set. You'd switch to the keyboard for faster typing, but you got all the alphabet and the characters that you wanted to. And so by the time you got your cursor to point to some object, you'd already told the computer what class of object and what you wanted to do with it. Bingo, simplest one. So it was very rapid. Those are just things were evolving back then. So this is sort of the normal way people would work in that. And we tried running interactive meetings with this computer support. So this was 1967, a meeting where you could bring up things in the menu, drop around. Anybody could grab a local mouse, and if you push down the button on it, a big cursor would appear on the screen, and that person could use it to point to everyone else what it was that they were talking about. And so I had an all-day one in my office then for doing all my thinking work, etc., starting about in 88 maybe. No, 68. And we gave a presentation at the computer conference in 1968 where we piped on video up to San Francisco from Menlo Park. And we had 4 video, and we had quite a mix of video cameras, etc., bringing up video from cameras as well as from our computer display, and mixing those with videos we picked up from cameras on stage up there where I was, so I could split this and get half of the beam on my face, and half of it was what I was showing people. So the system was very good for showing the presentation-like thing as well as flip into gear and demonstrate things. So we brought people. People from my lab could come up with their faces on the screen to demonstrate and show people things. So it was really collaborative at a distance, showing with a full hypertext world in which we could jump to diagrams and source code and all that. And so one of the things that we've fought for years is this thing that got very popular in the 80s of easy to learn and natural to use. And this is saying this is what your interfaces ought to be. And from the start, the pursuit that I felt driven toward, and I'd like to get the rest of the world really oriented, is, hey, we want the highest performance knowledge work we can get from our people, and collectively and individually too. And we don't want to have it all set the stage by what's easy to learn for the initial users, and what would be thought of as natural to use by initial users. So could you imagine your current automobile system of today being pictured as easy to learn and natural to use by somebody that appeared here from 1850? It says, no way. It would be very hard. There'd be an overwhelming number of traffic laws, of conventions, of skills to do, etc., of the rules of the road, of the DMV operations, of how you finance and buy one, how you insurance it. It just was a huge mixture of things like that. And the thing that gets me is every time I merge traffic at 60-some miles an hour on a freeway, and I'd look in the rear view mirror, and a little piece of glass like that, I take a glance back there, and I assess the situation of the oncoming things of these, 3 to 4,000 pound hunks of metal coming careening along at 65 or so miles an hour, and I calmly merge. From that image is the assurance I have. And if you'd ask somebody 100 and some years ago, what do you think about that? And they didn't use mirrors at all for that kind of thing in the past. It was you look at yourself a little bit, but you never used it dynamically. So there's a skill we just take for granted. So you talk about that. So the questions are, if you're going to be doing interactive computer usage, and that's the way you do your serious knowledge work, are you going to be really set? Are you going to set some guy come up for a weekend to ski, and he decides what would be natural, easy to learn and natural, compared to somebody who spent some time doing it? And there's a real trick. Bicycles fascinate me. I wanted to build a radio-controlled bicycle at one time, and I had to learn how bicycles really worked, and I realized people don't know how bicycles work, and yet they can learn to ride them. And they think it's because they're balancing, and it's really because they're steering their wheels under them to make the balance. And you can ride with no hands like that because front wheels have a... Anyway, all that stuff like that. So we can teach kids how to ride something we don't know how it really works, but they learn. Okay? So it's really not something that's easy to learn and natural to use, but it made the trick. So what would the world be like if you said, oh, I've got this wheeled vehicle. Come into my store, you can get on it immediately, and it's easy to learn and natural to use. See? So as far as I'm concerned, a lot of today's interface stuff is sort of on this model. It just evolved in a fancier and fancier tricycle. See? And there are things to learn. So we back off a little bit and say, hey, let's rethink what it is that we could do to couple what humans have in the way of mental machinery, sensory, motor machinery, mental processing, coordinate skills of this sort, that we learn all sorts of very, very strange things that no way were there when people evolved the machinery they have in them like that. So why don't we really try? So that's, to me, that's that kind of pursuit that's there to go after. There's another one. Who would have thought? There's something else. You're going to be working organically with your ideas and your concepts. You want to get right down inside it. You don't want horrors of horrors. You say somebody's going to make this especially smart agent, artificial intelligence computer that's going to tell you what to do and da-da-da-da-da like that. You say, look, when it gets right down to it, I've got to mold those concepts in some externalized way, of set of symbols that I can create more effectively with the computer, can help me mold them in some kind of medium that wasn't there when we got all these conventional pictures of what a document is. Document, in quotes. See, well, what's the document of the future going to be like? It's going to be an online, structured sort of thing built up of objects inside the computer whose relationships are explicitly connected to map the kind of conceptual relationships between the concepts in your head that you're symbolizing to externalize. And you say, well, that'll be very complicated to do. And you say, well, the computer's there to help me get it out there. The computer's there to help me get all sorts of optional views of whatever structure and arrangement there is in there to see how that matches my feeling for structural relationship among the concepts or the details of them, and things like that. So that's the image that we were starting with from the early 60s, as something different is going to be there, and we really feel like the world can go after that. So why not you guys? I don't know. Something else. Well, I could never learn to fly that stuff, so get a pilot to carry you around if you don't have time to learn. Great. Now let's switch to starting to talk more about the future, okay? That means we have to do something up here. And the things that I learned very painfully through the years, many of those things were something that you could say, poor me, the world doesn't understand. Or they could say, you know, are those guys just being obdurate and getting in the way, or they're greedy, or what? But they just aren't hearing me. Well, sometime in the late 50s, I'd had a few experiences like that, or like I gave a talk to some researchers at Stanford, and afterwards, 3 of them cornered me, and one of them particularly was very angry. And turns out they were people who had been studying information retrieval. And they just essentially sort of shaking. I mean, you know, shaking with sort of anger, the finger under my nose saying, look, all you're talking about with this online stuff is information retrieval. That's all you're talking about. And I said, it seems to be somewhat different to me. Oh, no, it's all you're talking about. And we are professionals in information retrieval. And we study it a lot. And we just really feel offended that you come around glibly and saying it's going to change because you're going to get these computers in there like that. Look, we study computers and information retrieval, and we know. That really shook me up. And then I started thinking around that I'd run across that. The psychologists were telling me I had no business being in there, that cognitive psychology would study how you improve people. You know, I was getting all sorts of voluntary advice from other places. When I was at Berkeley, And I started out being an acting assistant professor in EE when I got my PhD. And I started telling people, well, this is what I really want to do. And the older heads, within a year, got me convinced that because of the way peers evaluate you, and that's how your promotion goes in the university environment, you'll be an acting assistant professor forever, yes, if you keep following that. And I didn't take it as anything personal. I just said, you know, that's probably right. So I have to go someplace where I have a little better chance to make it work. So that's when I went to SRI. And I almost got the same story there when I started interviewing. A friend of mine was my first one interview. He'd been at Berkeley and got out before I. So he was saying, have you told anybody else what you want to do? No, you're the first one to talk to. Well, my advice is don't talk about this stuff. Just tell them about the patents you got on your research and such. Oh, why? Well, others too far out. It'll prejudice them against you. Well, okay. So I didn't talk about it, and I got hired. See, so there must be a correlation. But I ran across a very interesting paper in the late 50s then, after a series of experiences like that, saying there just must be something I'm missing. You know, it seems reasonable, and it's a future that's there. So a paper written by two people at RAND talking about the difficulties of setting up multidisciplinary research projects. And they said the difficulty is your research project may be formulated to go off in this direction, and it'll have a framework of what it is, the kind of rationale, the reasons, but you're going to have to bring in these different disciplines. And each of them, the people in those disciplines has grown up within a discipline and absorbed without thinking a conceptual framework. Today you would call it a paradigm. And those conceptual frameworks don't align. They evolve sort of in a kind of special domain that people have. The anthropologists have one, the business guys would have another, the psychologists would have another, the engineers would have another. So he says you got to get them oriented onto a conceptual framework in common. And the process is looking for that special framework we call the search process. And when you got the search done and you got the framework that was appropriate and unified, then you could do the research. And that really just resonated so much. So that's why I stopped and did 2.5 years to create this paper called A Conceptual Framework for Augmenting the Human Intellect. And so what I can switch to now is sort of how that grew. So in it I'd like, you know, I say, all right, I use the term boosting the collective IQ. I used to call it augmenting human intellect. Then I realized that intellect sounds a little too precious for people. I switched to saying augmenting your knowledge work, but it really, the collective IQ is a really meaningful term now. So Christina Engelbart is one of our daughters, and she had a lot of experience working with us. She had a degree in anthropology from Berkeley, and she sort of made the mistake of listening to her old man for a while, talking about, you know what, the anthropology, the culture of organizations are going to change. That's a lot, that's half of what my stuff is about, even though I only get to talk to technical people. Oh, thank you. You know, I could make some crack about, gee, I wish I got service like this at home. And then I thought, you know, two things. If I want any service at all, I better not say it. And, and the other one is, I get a lot of service at home. Yes, dear. So anyway, it's that conceptual framework. Well, Christina then started working in my lab in the late 70s and got very interested and decided she didn't want to go to graduate school. She wanted to go out and work with the natives who were, by then we were selling service to organizations trying to harness our things and changing the way of working. So later on, she and her husband, she quit when she and her husband did a startup, but in 1989 we started the Bootstrap Institute, and she's been helping ever since, and it's, I acknowledge, terrific help. Having smart kids is pretty nice, isn't it, Glenn and Susie? I think they are. Okay, this paradigm map, it sort of begins, we could spend hours going around it. Underneath each of those boxes is sort of a concept that's very meaningful. And if I begin with what my framework was, way at the start, high-performance organizations. I really stated, we're looking, how does human organizations learn to cope better with complexity and urgency? Because if we don't, I just couldn't picture that our society could continue coping well, that the world is getting more complex and moving faster, and yet our ability to cope with the problems and issues that arise, most of them have to be done collectively in that sense. Our ability to deal collectively in a smart way with things and rapidly is just not keeping up with the rate at which these challenges hit us. And so it's like being in a vehicle, all collectively in a vehicle, going faster and faster through terrain that's rougher and rougher, and the vehicle has a very sluggish way of controlling where it's going to go, and a not very smart way at that, but sluggish and dumb, and headlights that don't shine very far up in the future, so they don't grok very much about what's coming, and they can't steer very well, and there aren't any brakes to speak of. I guess the conservatives, yes, there are brakes, but they aren't, and it isn't a reverse, if that's what you mean. All right. But anyway, the sense for me has grown through the years that it's really a critically important issue that if there is some chance of our boosting the collective IQ in the sense of improving our capability to cope, then it's almost like a survival issue. And it will be a survival issue for some countries, some companies, etc. But I'm thinking too of humanity, see, that we just have to get smarter about the way we deal collectively with the collective problems. And so this objective, if there's any chance we should get going, well, then you go through a lot of thinking about what do you do about that. Well, one of the things you learn soon as you start looking at it, that any basic generic whole capability in a collective unit comes from a whole infrastructure of other capabilities. And computer programmers can get that immediately, because if you very rarely have something that one command generates in one whole sense the result. It calls on a lot of subordinate things that call on subordinate things. So we have lots of structures of capabilities inside an organization. And they talk about process reengineering, and that's grown to be something that is important. And so, but anyway, that was a very important one for us to. These are 1962 sort of vintage concepts, but they're extremely meaningful to me. This one is a very, very important one, that that the whole way in which we augment humans. That means take a human that's born and grows up in a blank environment. And then you says, what do you have to add to that human to augment the capability up to what you guys walk around with every day? So you realize, oh, I got here with an automobile or something, but that's just one sort of thing over here in the technology. Look at all I had to learn in order to use it, to run it, etc. And all the rest of the things. I've got a big set of things on the human side that I had to absorb and learn and get conditioned into, etc., to learn. So it's these two systems co-evolved. And all of our history starts talking about the big deals over on the right-hand side, at least the techie guys do. And really, for every major innovation on the right side, there was a lot of adaptation that took place and shift on the left-hand side. If a catapulting set of changes starts happening on the right-hand side, we weren't aware of the processes that changed the left-hand side. So we said, gee, we better become aware, and we better get conscious about the evolution of that, or what's going to drive the change. Well, there's a lot of talking about that, but the real sense is we have to find a pragmatic way to shepherd the co-evolution of those two sides. Well, great, let's find a pragmatic way. Well, on one hand, you better think there's going to be a lot of investment, lots of energy and a great deal of money and a great deal of headaches and frustration, etc., invested in making those changes. Well, step by step by step by step by step. Or what if we found some investment strategy, the return on investment started compounding. So that's the thing that's been driving me for years. Oh, that just means what strategy would yield the best return on investment? Aha, I'm glad you asked that question. I just happen to have a strategy. See? So this has been the underlying driving thing for me for 33 years. This realizing that it needs a strategy and saying, oh, well look, there is such a thing as an improvement infrastructure. What is the infrastructure of processes and roles, etc., that exists in order to improve the way I do something? See? Well, it looked like if you got the right kind of improvement infrastructure, then some of the early things you improve, you could specialize on improving on things that not only would help your collective work, but would help your improvement process go. So it would improve your improvement. So that's why we call it bootstrapping. See? And that's just how the sense of bootstrapping came through all through the years. Your computer boots up and it says, oh, starts up from scratch. And it's got a little bit of memory inside a computer that doesn't go away when the power turns off. But that's expensive and useless, so you've got a minimum hunk of that. All that's smart enough in there for is when it fires up and gets going, it reaches into the hard disk and brings in a little bit more and loads it and links it in. And that's enough to reach in and get some more, and that's enough to reach in and get some more, and pretty soon it's bootstrapped itself up for doing what you want. And he says, oh great, so why don't we take that model? And so here we sit looking at the future out there. See? And there are a lot of things out there that if we could reach out and bring into the now and make it work for us, would improve things. Jesus, why don't we specialize first in reaching out and bringing the things into the now that help us be more effective at sizing up the future and reaching out and bringing them in? So that's the bootstrapping thing. So he says, oh, that came to this bootstrapping strategy. So then you look at it and say, what are the capabilities that would probably help best in the kind of infrastructure that we could conceive of? So back in this improvement infrastructure, we looked at some things underneath that, and I don't have time to get into more detail about that, but we says, oh, this thing of what you call collective IQ, if collectiveness means that it works in distributed networks so people can share and collaborate at a distance and work together effectively. And if you really refine it a little bit, it means concurrently we can develop, integrate, and apply knowledge concurrently out throughout our organization and our individuals, etc. So that became the target. So that's why, for me, in the late 60s and the 70s and ever since, the work on trying to do the collaborative support on distributed groups, etc., has been there, and that's the driving thing for it like that. So he says, well, what do you have to do in there if you're going to build a system? For sure, if it's really going to work collectively in a sense, that system has to be interoperable. That means your particular group or your community interest or something, what it does is going to produce knowledge that can be accessed and worked with in the same nice, new, exciting way as somebody else's over here, because people are going to want to integrate and share between the two. So that interoperability has to spread. You can get more and more things. You just say, look, we probably can't design even 2 islands in the world in which this set of knowledge domains and this one, they have to interop between them, but it isn't worth that much to have them so they can interoperate. And he says, hey, I don't believe that's that way. And scalability is another. That the way in which we specifically use the really exotic ways of working online or something have to be scalable, really scalable. So you could talk about the nation's collective IQ, you could talk about the United Nations collective IQ, etc. like that, so that the knowledge base in there, so in the sense, the technology is not going to be the limiting factor. You can just know it's inevitable. That the nanotechnology capability is just inevitably going to make it so that the world's knowledge base can be stored and accessed online, etc., and evolvable, etc. And so the methodologies, the conventions, the ways of working need to shift. So that's the kind of technology through the years that we were trying to make. And it was very hard to explain it to people like that, because it was it just sounds very, very grandiose. It's sort of like telling somebody in, 1910 that, by God, we're going to get to the moon, and it could seem that way. But so there are a lot we could do specifically. We did it, but it was hard a lot of times to steer it in ways that said, yes, it's upward compatible with where this has got to go. Let's go that way, and it wouldn't be the way viewed as popular at the time, etc. But nowadays, with the World Wide Web streaming across, etc., and Internet really being exciting to people, it really is the time. So we are really quite excitingly coming out and telling people, look, there is a strategy, and this open hyperdocument system is down the middle, and we've got lots we've learned over the 20 years that was out there working through a lot, and extensions of it, etc. We can marry that with people, marry that with other people's technologies. There's a way to go. How do you deploy your early capabilities? There's some very explicit things to realize about things we call high-performance teams, that you start learning how to make especially high-performance and collective knowledge work from teams that you recruit and train and equip, especially, that really set the stage for where the world's going to go. And then you do something that we call really start getting to learn how to get the communities that are oriented to improve something together and say, you want to make an improvement community? Well, get on the network, become a network improvement community, and there are a lot of new technologies and techniques that you're going to get going to make that community a lot more effective at improving itself and the individual members. So whether the community is a university, or is a region like Santa Barbara, or a state like California, or a country, or a company, a big company, that sort of thing seems to me is inevitable. And it'd be the kind of focus that would really bring the sense of collective IQ right to the fore, because that's what your community is trying to do. So I'd like just another hour. Just hold on. We talk about this whole augmentation system. So it was a real breakthrough in about late '61 or something like that. I finally started listing all the things I thought augmented people. And of course I started as an engineer over here, but I'd had the dream for about 10 years then of the way computers interactively could work and support people. So I started out here, and I started adding a few things over here, and it dawned on me, I could almost remember the event, of how rich and complex is the human system side, and without it, this side doesn't mean anything. And just pure invention on here, if you say, I'm inventing something that improves a current ongoing process or something over here, then it has a niche, and it gets brought in and done. So slowly then the left-hand side starts evolving. Then there's more opportunity for invention on the right, and they go like this. Some inventions, if you bring them out too soon, there's no market for it on the left yet. But what do you do when the rate of change in that right side is so much faster than the organic change on the left? Organic evolution that you've just not noticed through the years. One of the biggest problems I've faced all through the years comes from the words "of course." See, somebody be talking to you and you're trying to get a picture about, it's really going to change and stuff. Well, pretty soon there's something that either literally or figuratively they would have said, well, of course, these things and these things and these things are what we do with it, etc. And you say, well, pretty soon you learn not to push the buttons and go beyond that, because this paradigm of what is sort of fixed about that left-hand picture, people haven't been talking enough about the shifts and the changes, and the fact that maybe in the next 5 years your organization might revolutionize itself and get some new roles in the left-hand side, new procedures, customs, new ways of working together. Actually, there'd be changes in the working language, not only different roles and things, definition of them, but the things you see in the screen when you're going after it, the objects. You want to have names for the objects in your knowledge base, and paragraph and sentence aren't enough. And there are many, well, anyway. And the processes you operate on them will change, so your knowledge workshop vocabulary has to evolve, and your skills and your knowledge and your training and your working attitudes, the attitudes about whether or not you're willing to share what you've just thought about etc. Well, you don't have to. In many society social structures, those won't get shared because that's the way I keep the power in my organization. Okay, the organizations that won't change like that are just bound to die out. There's no way that that collective capability, and those organizations that do develop that collective capability will be real winners, and the others are going to die. So you just say to yourself, look, some way or other that evolution is going to take place. And the difficulty in making changes in the left, you can be very empathetic with people. You realize that it's hard to change. You got your eye on your job and the results, etc., to think you have to back up and redo your kitchen, so to speak, before you can go on cooking meals every day. It's very difficult. And if you're a really old character and say, I've got 5 more years to retirement, Christ, I worked all these years in this kind of a framework and this kind of knowledge and skill, we shifted around like that, hey, I don't fit anymore. And I'm too old to change and learn. And this is, boy, I empathize. Well, here I'm almost empathizing on it. But anyway, those are the very pragmatic things that need to be faced. And so you said, well, if we learn how to face them with a humanistic sort of approach, everybody working together, etc., some organizations are going to start evolving so that collectively they have a lot more intelligence. They're harnessing what the individuals can do. The Glen Cullers down in the middle of those things can find something to tie into that'll be a lot more effective than the social environment that they had in the past, so they can really pour it in. And I don't think I'll let you get away, too, because I think of the kind of interface. We find some way to get around that neurological thing. See, Glen's got this 500 horsepower engine he calls a brain in there, and the transmission system out to the wheels broke down. And I really think that it's important we find some way to reconnect his transmission system. So I know there's a lot of clever, ornery things going on in that head. And, oh, nice guy. And I really think that part of reaching into this collective stuff includes how we can deal with all kinds of physical handicaps, the blind and the deaf and the physically handicapped and even some of the emotionally handicapped or mentally handicapped, because you find a very interesting profile that somebody can be almost a schizo in some ways and have some really freaky high peak capabilities in others. So if we really knew how to put a team together, we could harness it and make them feel productive. And so I just can hardly stand not going to the next thing. And I promise that by 7 o'clock tonight we'll be done. No, I'll be talking to a... There won't be anybody that says you can't hear because there won't be anybody here. So, all right, let's look at this coevolution one just for a minute. Just for 2 minutes. I said, hey, we don't generally do it this way, but what if we say all the technology aspects that you could just sort of find some way to order them and list them as they get increasingly far out of the technological innovations that are there or out to here that we anticipate that we could get them. And then we look at the different things we could do inside an organization and we find some clever way to order them out here like that till we can anticipate. So a lot of those is where the bottleneck in our minds come from, our paradigms, is we aren't looking for candidate changes in the same way along that axis as we look for them along the technology axis. We've got hordes of people inventing stuff out here, researching and such. We don't have that out here. And in fact, our organizations are sort of a captive of this horizontal dimension. People coming out with the next thing in groupware. Well, should we take that one or that one? Well, which one is based upon the most research about how organizations can really work effectively? Well, go into the research labs and find out. And what you find out is they aren't based upon the pragmatic thing of putting together a bunch of people and really seeing what kind of collective horsepower you can get out of them. They're just the next things that would sell in the marketplace, etc. That's the way. And you say the marketplace isn't organized to do the things that society most needs to get the effectiveness. That would be up to the user organizations and communities to decide what they'll buy. Well, how are the user organizations going to know? Their experience comes from a cluster of today's technologies that are available. What's available out here that you can put together an experimental group and see? Well, there's no market for things out there, so why would they be out there? So, it looks to me like this frontier blew out like this, where it used to be about like that first cube, first square down here in the origin. So boom, it's going out like that. In 20 years, it'll be way out there. And maybe we'll have, by organic changes, moved out here in some funny way. So if you thought, hey, taking my company, my country, my city, my university from someplace out here, out into that, is like taking a big, complicated wagon train out to the frontier. And there isn't any map. They're just people, that all kinds of advice and consultants around here like that, pointing at this pass or that place or something like that. But there isn't much experience out there. So how are you going to get it? And who's going to be responsible? So this is a new sort of phenomenon in our society that we've outpaced in the technical capabilities way beyond where people can make simple extrapolations that are reasonably accurate about what it's going to mean and market it. So we need a different way for going at it. So what we need to get, for one thing, is little outposts out there, right? Might be tough territory to defend or something like that. But we don't want to take our whole wagon train out there till we maybe send some people out there and set up an outpost. So what does that mean? That says, I'll take this cluster of designers over here and I'll give them the latest equipment, see what happens. How far are they going to move up into new ways of working and thinking? And so we've been a party to some experiments like that, enough to say, well, no, you can't take an existing team of people with a very mixed sort of array of maturity about handling emotional stress and changes and such as that, and some of them are progressive, some of them are just hanging on barely, some of them are insecure, some of them are overconfident. You try to move them like this, and every issue and problem like that is amplified immensely. Now, this is something that, to make a significant one, you have to call for recruits and tell them you're going to have to go to boot camp and really learn some new things, and then you're going to be working and we're going to watch you and sweat you, and you're going to, etc. Would you get any volunteers? Well, I think you would. But anyway, the country's organizations that get that and start learning how to do that. Here's two different kinds. One can use today's best organization practices with new technologies. The other can use today's technologies with new practices. And you says, but how do we get beyond that? How do we get out here with somebody out there with an outpost? Well, even this, how do we ever get one out there? And if we don't populate this frontier with some outposts, we're not going to know really where the swamps are and the good passes and the nice land, etc. So who's going to risk? And it's extremely expensive to move organizations in this vertical direction. If you've been involved in that to very much of an extent, you sort of realize that, the rule of thumb, I would guess that it's like 10 times as expensive to move in this up and down stage as it to move left and right. So anyway, the sort of orientation that we've really started to say, you have to get some collective work, and the bootstrapping sense is that we really have to get an improvement community working. We have to get some kind of alliances going. We have to get people out there. You have to ring the doorbell in the government to say what you start sponsoring for exploratory stuff ought to be pushing out into here and making available for people the chance to get really experience in their organizations. Anyway, that's the pursuit of our little Bootstrap Institute. And we turn here and say, well, your community, the role of university is just bound to change immensely. For one thing, the cycle time, or the half-life of the usefulness of the knowledge you get in university is getting shorter and shorter, so you have to continue. And the other is, you're going to need to be starting coupling more closely in with the rest of the world. Well, great. This kind of networking stuff means that you can be on part of a special new kind of knowledge conduit, in which, yes, being close together for researchers and stuff has a certain bonding value of use. And getting research team close together is better than if they're separated, no matter what. For a while, it is. And so he says, well, the university could start getting some very interesting new collaborative roles out there with what essentially have been its customers. And the customers are used to sort of picking up the products at graduation day and who turn around and say goodbye to the university. But instead, it's going to be something where it's out there and more of a constant connection between the universities and the utilization world for knowledge utilization and change and effect. So it can be a much more dynamic and effective kind of world. Regions like the greater Santa Barbara, it says, look, there are a lot of issues about improvement, stuff that we need to work on collectively. Let's start some real, sensible network collectiveness. And one of the things, in both cases, university and such, is let's look for the best ways to support that collective work on improving things. So there are interesting products out there that will support it. But you'll find also, unless you start really ringing the doorbell of some place that says they want to build an improvement community of people who want to improve networked improvement communities. We call that a turbo NIC. And so we say, all right, so in the end, that's real bootstrapping, and that's what we're trying to hope we get network improvement communities going and talk to them about turbo NICs. So I really have another 2 hours, but I just know I've done it. And so we're going to stop and have a reception, and I'll be available to talk to people, and my wife Ballard's going to have the mouse, and Glen's going to be hiding from someplace, and Susie's going to be there to get congratulated, because I really say this is your day, and boy, Glen, you deserve it. Okay? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Doug, for giving your vision of the future in this new knowledge economy, maybe I can say, or network knowledge economy. I like to keep thinking, I was telling Bert Fried when I was sitting, that in fact the global information age which you people spawned with the internet is literally upon us, and I think you're telling us what will happen in the future. So, as Doug mentioned, you're all invited to stay and enjoy the wine and cheese reception. Before we do that, I would like to say I want to thank Dale Taylor and Bill Proctor. You probably noticed some Glen Culler t-shirts, where they are the ones who actually made those Glen Culler t-shirts available. It costs you a little bit of money, but all of the proceeds from which will go towards the Glen Culler Endowment Scholarship Fund. So come enjoy, have some wine and cheese, and thank you very much.
don't have all that. Okay. This is for Glen now. You're on. Okay. I feel so strongly that you and Doug have been parallel all these years, and being buddies too just makes it really special.
Okay. 2, 3. I always wondered if anybody ever maybe got together.